Welcome back to the UnchartedX podcast. This is Ben, and this is episode number 28. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you a podcast that I recently did with Kyle and Russ Allen, the brothers of the Serpent. It was another great chat from those guys. It was kind of coming on the back of our most recent Egypt trip last year and some time that I'd spent with those guys up in Utah at a recent Contact at the Cabin event. It was a fun conversation. We get into lots of different topics. It was kind of triggered by a conversation or a presentation that Russ gave at the Utah event, really focusing around the phenomena of the down tools movement that seems to happen at a lot of these ancient sites. There's tons of different examples of kind of work in situ or work in progress that for one reason or the other was stopped at some point. There's lots of unfinished work on walls, there's boxes in corridors, lots of different examples, and it kind of leads into some interesting speculation and conjecture about what possibly might have happened. Alright, so before I kick off this podcast with the Snake Bros, just a quick update and reminder about a couple of my upcoming trips that you might be interested in coming along. In September, I'm going to be in the Channeled Scablands in the eastern Washington state with Randall Carlson, also with the Snake Bros, the Grow America guys. We're going to be in there doing a couple of two separate tours, so back-to-back tours, so two trips. If anyone's interested in getting in on those, it's just a fantastic opportunity to learn about the catastrophic flooding and the mega landscapes of the Ice Age from Randall Carlson. I've been on these trips before. I highly recommend them. It's always a very good time. Randall's an excellent teacher, and then in general, just hanging out at Soap Lake. It's a beautiful landscape. It's absolutely spectacular. It rivals things like the Grand Canyon, if you haven't seen it. And it's just a good time. We jam. There's lots of good food. It's a great place that we stay at, and it's just a generally good time and really good learning experience over a couple of weeks. So all of that's happening in September. You can find all the details for those trips at the website contactatthecabin.com. I'm also going back to Egypt. I've got two trips planned to Egypt this year. In October, I'm going to be joining Yusuf on his trip, which is called the Primordial Egypt Wisdom of the Ancients Tour. That starts on October 6th. It runs till the 19th this year. There are still spots available on this trip. You can find lots of details about it on the Chemitology website, which is Chemitology, Chemitology.com. I've also got a post about it on my website on UnchartedX.com. Check that out if you're interested. It's a great time to visit Egypt. It's going to be a fun trip. Once I get back from that, I'll be at home for a couple more weeks, and then I'm going back to Egypt in November for my big tour in November. That's been in the works for quite some time. This tour is pretty much sold out. There may be a couple of seats becoming available as we get a little bit closer. You can get on a wait list for the November trip if you like. I'll be going on that trip with the Snake Bros again, as well as the Grow America guys and Yusuf. And it's going to be I'm really looking forward to this one. It's going to be a great trip. It'll be a chance to get into the new museum too, which is supposed to be opening in November. Now, all of the details for this trip on my website, unchartedx.com/tour. One last thing that I did want to let people know about. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, they've actually reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in getting onto their video platform. So they're actually, as you know, there's a couple of podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience that do support video on Spotify. They've actually asked me to see if I'm interested in expanding to video on that platform, which I've said yes to. So I've started uploading my entire catalog of videos to Spotify. You can find all of those. It's not on this podcast, so this is the UnchartedX podcast. But if you search for UnchartedX videos on Spotify, you'll see the channel that I've set up there. I'm slowly uploading my entire library. I'm about halfway through it right now. I'm going to keep at that for the next couple of weeks, hopefully get all of my videos up there. So if you're interested in watching the content on Spotify, all of those videos will be up there and supported with the Spotify app on cell phones. It's a much better mobile app, I find, than YouTube. You can do things like, turn off your phone and the audio will keep going, as opposed to the YouTube app, which, if you turn off the phone while you've got a video playing, it just stops. And I know a lot of people like to listen to the audio of these things, but yeah, quick reminder, it's not the same thing as the UnchartedX podcast. This audio podcast will continue. I'm going to keep doing this, but there is also going to be UnchartedX videos on Spotify. Obviously, they'll also all be on YouTube, as always, but I'm going to also be mirroring all of that content up to Spotify. The one last thing, I do try to run the channel and the podcast through something called the value for value model. So if you're interested in supporting what I'm doing, if you like what I'm doing over here, you can find a way to support that by taking a look at all of the options with some value or with some time, talent, or treasure, as Adam Curry likes to say. All of those details are outlined on the website. It's unchartedx.com/support. I hope you enjoy the podcast with the Snake Bros. Cheers.
All right. So next week, I am planning on giving on the podcast a visual presentation that I gave this past weekend in Utah about some observations we had in Egypt. But giving that presentation in Utah sparked a bunch of conversations with Ben about bigger picture stuff. And of course, Ben also, hopefully everybody listening to this knows Ben's channel, UnchartedX. He produces fantastic videos, and he's been studying this stuff for a long time. So we were having great conversations in Utah about this. So we wanted to have Ben on to talk about some of the big picture stuff he's been thinking about and working on, and also discussing some of our observations from our previous Egypt trip and what we're looking forward to for the next one. So, indeed. Ben,
yes.
Take it away. I'm going to have a beer. You can do the rest of the show.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm going to need a break for a beer in a bit here too. But yeah, it was a great, and actually, so it was enjoyable. So you've doing that presentation, Russ. It was I sort of sat there and kind of interrupted you a whole bunch as we went through it. But it was what it spurred in my mind, because you were focusing on, and this is something that I guess you go through in detail in your next podcast, is the kind of the down tools moment, like, because it's one of those aspects of when you observe a lot of the work that happens, or like the building and across various sites. You'll notice in a whole bunch of places where it looks like tools have been put down for one reason or the other, and it kind of spurs like, well, what was the reason? What possibly could have caused this to happen across so many different sites and different places and everything else? And in fact, and what I started thinking about with it was, well, this isn't just a phenomenon that happens in Egypt. We also see similar things happen in South America and other places. In Easter Island, for example, we know there's that Moai head that's in a quarry. There's a bunch of other things, but what it made me think about was like, hey, it's because I liked how you were approaching it and sort of looking at one aspect of this whole crazy ancient mystery space, and I've always struggled with trying to put a presentation together, because it's like, well, I always try to cross the whole big picture. Like, all right, so starting
I need 10 days to get you guys up to speed, and then we can do the presentation.
It starts with the Big Bang, and then it moves on to, it's like, but it's a good, I think, exercise to maybe to look at the various areas that make up that big picture, at least for me. And I think that's, and we started talking about like, well, there's all of the evidence for like renovation and reuse, which I think is a really compelling story. When you look at particularly in Egypt, also applies in South America. There's the thing that you guys have talked a lot about, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with, is all the other adjacent fields of science that have had discoveries happen over the last 20 years that should be affecting the story of history. Things obviously like the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the extension of the human timeline, all of the work around genetics. There's a whole school of new data and information there that really should be affecting the story of history. We've got cultural and religious indicators. The Hamlet's Mill stuff, Dave Matheson's star myth lore, which kind of threads the needle between all of these various cultures, and it all kind of points back to this idea of, well, was there an original kind of seeding civilization that put all of these myths and legends and common stories and astronomical data and all of these things into all of these cultures? So there's so many different aspects to it. And then, as most of my work, most of the stuff that I really enjoy is some of the engineering aspects, the evidence for the technological disparities between different types of work. Often you see the most advanced, most precise, most impressive kind of stonework that's the hardest to explain at the oldest layers, at the oldest times.
That's right.
With the evidence for machining, for drill cores, for all of that type of thing. There's other angles to take around logistics and quarrying, and we can deep dive into that. But I think the big picture for me is tying up, because I never want to. I can't ever say that this stuff's 100% right. Like, I think anytime we look at the past, it's it's an interpretation of a very loose and lacking set of evidence, particularly the further back you go. It's difficult to really have a full set of evidence. We can never really say that. So the best we can do is kind of interpret what evidence we do have. And I think the story, for me at least, at this point, when you take into account all of this evidence from all of these different vectors, the thing that makes the most sense, at least to me right now, is this idea that, that there most likely was some form of as yet unknown ancient civilization that had a high technological capability or capacity for doing some of these things, and for knowledge, perhaps in different technological directions than our civilization has taken, and they were wiped out, and we inherited a lot of this stuff, and or at least our precursor civilizations like Egypt, like maybe those in South America, but particularly in Egypt, inherited a lot of stuff and then built their cultures up around that. And in some places that kind of agrees with what those cultures themselves say. But that's for me, that's that big picture. I've always struggled trying to put that whole thing together, because it feels like a 10-hour conversation.
Well, so what do you think about the way that, for example, some of the Cyclopean masonry on Easter Island and down in South America and in Egypt, how they look so similar? Do you think that's strong evidence of maybe a very widespread culture, or do you think that that's? I mean, I don't know. I struggle with this question, because I'm like, is this just the way you do it, or does this imply that the builders, in some way, were talking to each other at the very least?
It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Because you're right. I struggle a little bit with it, because you can't say that they're identical. I mean, there's definitely some spots where they're very similar. I mean, the walls in particular, like the Rapa Nui walls on Easter Island, very similar to some of the work in Egypt. And then you can draw strong parallels between parts of Peru and parts of Egypt. And there's other sort of bits and pieces of megalithic work here and there that line up. But at the same time, they're different. Like you could, South America's much more of a flowing, curved type of megalithic building, versus Egypt seems to be very linear and straight line orientated. Although there are exceptions to both of those cases. Yeah, you have there are some straight line stuff that happens in South America, but it's in the minority really. But yeah, it's tough.
Have you been to Japan? What about Japan?
I've been to Japan. I've been to the palace. I haven't seen all of the megalithic stuff there. That's I've been seeing some of it lately. What's interesting about that big wall that people see in Japan is that it's actually really thin. Like, it looks like a huge stone, but from what I understand, it's actually only fairly thin. So it's not like massive and thick like a lot of megalithic work typically is. But there's one good example that everybody shows that picture of. It looks like a huge megalithic wall. Yeah, I think it's only a few inches deep, some of that stone. But
okay.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, but still, it's like you see this megalithic.
That's almost like a facade they're trying to make look like older stuff that they had seen.
Yeah, like replicating some older stuff. True, it is, isn't it? And your point is that maybe that's just the way you solve the problem. Like, is this just the way you do this stuff if you were really trying to solve that problem? Yeah, I don't know. I do think it's an indicator. To me, I take it. I probably take it as an indication of some form of connection. Now, maybe it's different phases of a similar civilization, and like maybe an evolution of a similar technique that happened in these different locations. Impossible to kind of date a lot of that stone accurately, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got to think that there was some sort of connection going on with it, whether it was people talking and communicating and maybe sharing data and information on how to do it, or it could be different parts of a similar civilization. It certainly seems to me that, given all the evidence, and particularly you look at things like the Great Pyramid and the data on the Earth that's encoded in it, where they clearly understood the shape and size and dynamics of the planet, some of the fundamentals of nature, they understood longitude, then it was likely a global civilization to some extent. There's even some evidence for that in the earliest parts of the Egyptian civilization, that I think they could have inherited from their ancestors, things like connections with the Australian Aboriginals and the boomerangs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It seems like, that civilization, that builder, call them the builder civilization, certainly had the capability to be global, but I just don't know. It's not. it's a funny thing when you get into the timelines, right? I don't think this is necessarily a civilization that was just there 15,000 years ago and then got wiped out by the Younger Dryas. It's possible to me that could be far more distant in the past. 50, 60,
Yes.
100,000, maybe more years ago, and was wiped out by a cataclysm before that, like well before the Younger Dryas, because we know they happened.
Yeah.
But
And isn't that's that's kind of one of the ideas for Peru, right? That the sort of puffy megalithic stuff we see in Peru, like at Sacsayhuaman and stuff, that's actually the second level, the second stage of building.
Yeah.
That wasn't the oldest stuff. Is it Hanan
Pacha.
Yeah. Which was like rock cut as opposed to megalithic.
Yeah, and that's another thing. And Jesus Gamara and his video, I think it's called The Cosmogony of the Three Worlds. It's like an English DVD, kind of hard to find. I do have a copy of it. And he makes a case where you can see those three styles all around the world. I mean, in Peru, it's the most obvious, that Hanan Pacha. And by that, we mean it's kind of the monolithic style. It's not cellular. It's carved from the living rock. And we typically, South America, most people typically think of like the walls in Cusco, the Inca Roca walls, or the walls of Sacsayhuaman. Those are the cellular megalithic style, but there's an older style that's associated with sites like Kenko. But you see it on lots of sites. Alente Tambo has it, even at Sacsayhuaman, there's sections of it. And it's these carvings that are carved into the, quote unquote, living rock of the mountain itself. They're not blocks, It's just shapes carved into the living mountain of the rock. And it's incredibly impressive. This includes stuff like the Inca thrones, people call them, the little steps that are cut in. You have like pool shapes and just odd carvings, and like almost like there's been an acid dripped on some of this stone and it's just carved its path down, and really strange. I really don't know what to make of it. All you know is that it's been carved. This isn't natural. It's not really a quarry shape either. You can definitively state that, because in some places you'll see quite literally a three-dimensional rectangle cut out of a piece of rock, which doesn't make any sense at all if you're trying to quarry a piece, because you can't cut that away from the rock. You've carved that stuff out of that rock. It's hard to explain without the visual, but there's no way to cut it away.
You can't cut the very backside
that
you don't have any access to.
Yeah.
Until the pieces
It's not
removed.
like they were quarrying a block out.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because that's the orthodox explanation. Like, a lot of this stuff was the quarry for some of these other things. And
I haven't seen the stuff in Peru, but I'm curious. After looking at the quarry in Egypt, and the flattening of the stones and in the Osirian and at the third pyramid, it looks like the same type of tool that would have been used to do the rock cut stuff. Is that?
Yep.
Would you say that's?
Yeah, for sure. In fact,
Yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, I briefly alluded to it on my last video. If people haven't seen it, is specifically about the quarry and the scoop marks that we see in the Aswan quarry in Egypt. And there's always been this debate about the scoop marks. Is it pounding stones? What is it? But you can find those sort of scoop marks all around the world, like very, very similar scoop marks. You see them on the stones at Sacsayhuaman. You definitely see them in the Hanan Pacha work. You do see them on the megalithic stones themselves, and even Hugh Newman, I threw in a clip from him saying that he's seen all those scoop marks at Stonehenge, and a couple of examples. I think I threw up a photo or two in there. But yeah, it seems like it may have been the same type of tool.
So the same technology of tooling, but a different style of building.
Yeah, like slightly different style of building. It's really weird. Like, to me, it's like the bet. And Russ, you focused on this in your presentation in Utah. We talked a lot about the third pyramid, the Menkaure pyramid, at Giza, which is you have that pillowy look because it's sort of unfinished granite on top, but it's just a front surface that's unfinished. Everything else, the sides of these blocks are finished because they're matching each other. Yeah. That's what you take a picture of that and you look it up, you line it up next to like the Inca Roca wall, or one of them in Cusco, and it looks very similar. Because you have that same pillowy effect on the front and very precise kind of mating surfaces on the sides of the stones. It's really
It looks like
eerie.
And it looks stylistically like you would match it up. That's what I'm saying. It's like if you were looking at it as art, you would say this is the same artist. You recognize the style, or maybe you would say this is the same style of art, which implies that somebody's talking to the people are talking to each other, that there's a connection there somehow.
I
and
think
the
there has to
scoop,
be.
yeah, it seems like there has to be, but there is still the question of like, is this just? I don't know enough about stonemasonry to say that this is definitively, that you should connect these things, or maybe it's just, maybe a stonemason would say, well, no, this is just the way you would do it if you're doing this job. I'm not sure.
Maybe. I mean, you're right. It'd be interesting exercise to kind of line up the differences and the similarities.
Yeah.
Because again, I mean, if when we get down to Peru with you guys, I want to show you like the Coricancha is probably to me the interior work of the Coricancha. It's very straight and linear, and it's just bang on for Egypt. It's like the blocks in there have that unique kind of going around the corner style, and it's
Right.
like a smaller version of the Valley Temple, almost exactly the same. But then, so much else of it is this flowing, curving stuff. But that said, the megalithic work, say at Silistani and the Chulpa Towers, and there's a few other sites that are down towards the lake. A lot of that's very much sort of straight lined. You could take pictures of it, and it'd be like you wouldn't be able to, other than the coloring of everything else and the green sort of tones of Peru versus the desert tones of Egypt, they'd look identical.
If it was just close up of the stonework with nothing else in the photo,
you couldn't tell. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. And then
those Chulpa towers have blown my mind for a long time because they just look, and it's it's not really clear what they're for either. I get, but they're like, oh, these were tombs,
But they were for sure used that way eventually.
Yeah,
and you can see the imitated. That's another one of those good examples of like, imitation. I think this is a really interesting aspect of ancient Egypt, because you get that question a lot, right? It's like, well, how come the statues, these giant statues that you talk about, and these ones that have all this precision, how come the Egyptians look like that? Like that's what they painted on and everything too.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if you were, as they said, they were kind of a legacy culture with this 36,000 year history from Zep Tepi and the Shemsu Hor, and just go with the idea that you did inherit stuff, you may have also inherited the whole stylistic culture. You might have inherited a bunch of statues and had some understanding of what they looked like. So you would, for damn sure, dress yourself up if you would. These were the gods that walked the earth, and so Pharaoh's gonna want to look like that. He's gonna want to claim that he's a god. He's gonna want to capture as much significance as he can from the past and from those ancestors. And you don't have to look very far in our own culture to see the same sort of things. Like I made that joke, I think we're in Utah, about the Pope and all the different hats, and you look at our religions and the way all that dresses. I mean, this all has traditions that are rooted in history and previous cultures, and it's all symbolic, and they're trying to capture that stuff. There's meaning behind all of it. But it's not as if we just made up that style, and the Pope and the bishops and all these guys dress that way just because that's how they wanted to dress. It's like, no, this is all coming from history. And I think you might have another whole example of that in Egypt, playing this timeline out. So the same thing with the Chulpa Towers. So you go up and you go to these sites, Silistani. There's another one, Katimbo, which is just a hell of a hike up at Lake Titicaca to get up to, but it's worth it. You have these megalithic structures. Some of them are square, some of them are round. Incredible megalithic work, precision, big blocks, granite, this type of stuff. And then scattered around, you'll have the small block, the really rough work, basically imitating it. And it's
right.
Apparently according to the Orthodox timelines, no, that's just all the same people. They just did it differently. Like that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean,
right.
You see that in a lot of places.
Isn't there one of those towers that has, it's this beautiful megalithic smoothed down stones, that kind of sort of cyclopean style, and then there's a rough cobblestone ramp.
Oh yeah, there's a few of them. Yep, they're almost trying to preserve them. It feels like they were like trying to either cover them up, or there's ramps on either side of them, and some of them there's like stones all the way around them, not quite all the way around, but there's a bunch of them with ramps as well.
Okay, I was thinking like, well, if they were using them as tombs, the ramp is the only way to get. There's no entrance except at the top.
A lot of them have entrances at the bottom.
Okay.
They all face I think they face the east. I might be wrong, but I think they face the east. And you can get in. I've been into a few of them. You crawl into them, and they were definitely used as burial sites. Like there's skulls and stuff in them. That's, again, not necessarily indicative of what they may have been originally.
Right.
Or what they were for. Because you always have that mystery of, like, how did these blow up? Because there's quite literally strong evidence that they exploded. Like, it's so strange. Like, particularly at Silistani, there's, like, blocks from some of these towers, and they're just spread over quite a distance. And these are big blocks, like 5-6 ton blocks, some of them even bigger. It's insane. Like, yeah, I don't know what was going on, but they're kind of spread out across a wide areas. The Blackadder quote's like, "What should I do if I step on a hand grenade, Sarah?" well, Baldric, standard procedure is you leap up 10 feet into the air and scatter yourself over a wide area. Yes. You guys watch Blackadder? That shit's good.
No.
You gotta watch Blackadder, man. It's a world of entertainment. Yeah.
That was unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to think that there's a connection. The masonry can show a connection back to that, And then there's evidence, like we were talking about at the beginning, of work being done that stops suddenly and then is never completed, which is part of the presentation that I'll be giving next week.
Yep.
And what I did in Utah. So the idea that these people were in the process of the idea that I have in my head, I don't know if this is true, because what you're saying is like, how old is this really? And, did all of these job sites where they were in the process of doing something, did they all stop on the same day? That's the other question that I have, is like, if we could date this stuff, would we get an indication that this all sort of happened at the same time? In other words, a global event stops work, ends the civilization that's capable of doing the work. And that's why it's never been continued. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's, I don't know what other explanation to make for it, but when you have a kind of that type of thing happening across a wide area, like you can imagine maybe one site or this site might stop because a particular king dies or something, like we've seen in other examples, like Seti, the tomb of Seti, like they never finished the artwork in his tomb because it's like he died, and it's like his son went, you know what, let's have you paint something else.
Right.
But it seems to have happened in so many different areas all of a sudden. And, some of them are big tools down moments, like the box that's unfinished in the Serapim that's sitting in the middle of the hallway. Like, it's like, what? Come on, Johnson, take this thing out of here. Like, leave that thing in the way. What are you doing? But
that's right.
We see it all over the place. I think what complicates it is this idea of multiple phases. I always try to caution people when they look at the past. It's like, remember that even with the standard model, you're still looking at thousands and thousands of years of, ups and downs inside of civilizations, different civilizations, construction, deconstruction, reuse, renovation. Like, it's hard to know what you're looking at. But if you take the longer view on some of this, with things like, South America with the incredibly ancient-looking Hunan Pacha, that monolithic work. Then you've got the megalithic work period, which, seems to have been not as old, but is still very ancient. And then you've got the Inca work, and you have similar situation in Egypt. It's like, well, were there more than one sort of down period, and was there more than one kind of let's call it high technology building phases or megalithic building phases? It's hard to say.
Yeah. And another interesting question, going back to what you were saying about if it is the case that the ancient Egyptians inherited a lot of this stuff, and then the pharaohs are making themselves look like these gigantic statues because they're, it's sort of a cargo cult a bit.
Yep.
Advanced cargo cult, I'd say, because the Egyptians were also very good at stonework, and they were quite advanced. But still, it makes you wonder what those statues were for if they were not depicting pharaohs. Because they're, like, we can look at the boxes and say, well, these seem to be functional. The pyramids may have a function as well. We don't know what it was, but they seem like machines when you're crawling around inside them.
Mm-hmm.
But what the hell are the statues?
Well, I don't think there's any argument. I mean, for me, it's like, clearly they're symbolic and ceremonial. Like, they may well be depicting the ancient kings, or it seems like, and this is the thing, because they all seem to have the same face. You can make this study. There's been a few studies done of, they're not all exactly the same, but there's a lot that are very, very similar. Like, it's the same face, and you have that other element of it where it's like and this gets back to the studies that have been done on the symmetry of them and stuff, where it's almost it's so symmetrical and perfect that it's almost inhuman. Like it has this touch of the alien almost about it with these statues. So it may not be a specific person so much as it's representative of a race or a culture or something like that. But I don't think you'd make much argument that they're functional. To me, it's like, like you said, the boxes I think had a function, and some of these sites may well have had a function with their their underground U-shaped blocks. They were clearly piping around some material underneath the floor, the different types of the basalt, the limestone, the white calcite, the granite, like these combinations of stones on sites, along with the pyramids and the underground boxes. That may well have had a function, and I feel like it might have. But the statues, it's like they're still ceremonial. Like it's still artwork. It have to be.
Yeah, it's artwork.
But they're also, they've benefited from this manufacturing technique that has all of this precision in it. And I think the manufacturing technique used to make these things, and they developed the precision because they needed it for the functional aspects of the stonework, the boxes and whatnot, and maybe some of the columns, but the slabs and the blocks and things. But then they could apply that to some of this work like the statue. So you end up with this incredible symmetry and precision. You've got the same type of machining marks, the tube drills, the saw cuts, the overcuts, things that are very indicative of some powered process going on. But yeah, it seems, I think it has to be symbolic or just ceremonial, like representative of that culture. And then that's when you combine it with the idea that the Egyptians started with a bunch of knowledge and culture, maybe their religion, maybe their that some of those stories, and they might have had some, like you said, a cargo cult. They might have had some memory or at least stories of this capability. So if the pyramids did something, or there was some energy source, or there was something that happened that enabled this high technology civilization, they might have had some cultural memory of that they then tried to capture through ceremony, through I guess just ritual.
Yeah,
and it's
ritual.
I think you made a good example. We were talking on the weekend about, like, and I often say this as well. It's like, if another cataclysm happened, you would within a couple generations, you'd have people sitting around a campfire talking about plasma TVs and cell phones like they were magic, and you might end up with guys doing things like polishing black bits of rock to make it look like a cell phone, and then you know dancing around it at the fire trying to activate it and turn it on, because once upon a time the ancestors could use these shiny black rocks to communicate across the globe, or to pull information from the air and answer any question or whatever. Like that's right. that's to me, I think
it's weird how just talking about that sounds like certain legends of things that already exist, so it's so strange. You can see how it could happen again.
Yeah,
for sure. All right, well, let's take a break. We'll come back with more from Ben with Ben from UnchartedX. There we go. I got it in the end there.
All right, here we go. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast. We have Ben from UnchartedX on, talking about the big picture as it relates to the ancient world and all these megalithic sites, and the building or the builders of those sites, and what does it all mean?
Tell us what it means, Ben.
We came here with nothing but answers.
Mystery solved.
And that's why I haven't been talking at all. So. Go, Ben. Give us the answers.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. It's. I wish I had the answers. I'll tell you that. But I just need that time machine. That's that eternal debate. Where would you go, and to what period of time would you go?
Difficult Man, question. That's a tough question.
Yeah.
Well, you focused on your last video. You were focusing on the quarry.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems like, and this, I don't understand. Let's say, okay, so I don't understand why the pounding stone idea is still the mainstream theory. I just don't get it. It seems like we should, okay, me attack it from this direction. When was that theory first come up with that it was pounding stones? Since you've just done all this research, do you know roughly?
Yeah. So it was around 1850. It was oh man, I just need to pull up the name of the guy. What am I doing wrong here?
Stop the show.
Stop the show. I was literally just making
years.
Oh no.
Let's see. Sorry about this. It was
No problem.
I know the name of it was Reginald Engelbach. I'm sorry. Yeah, so Reginald Engelbach, and I quoted from him extensively in the video. So Engelbach was a British engineer. He was born in 1888. Worked with Flinders Petrie as his assistant for quite a while. He was an engineer. Took a great interest in Egypt. Came back, did a few of his own projects. In fact, it was bang on 100 years ago now. I think was when this first came up, because he really did the first excavation and detailed study of that obelisk in, I think, was it 1922. So yeah, it was at the 100 years ago basically, and he was the one who uncovered it. And he's like, well, we found all of these dolerite pounding stones. So he literally, there's a quote that I read from him. He's like, well, there's no marks. The obelisk itself, and in these areas we don't see the wedge and chisel marks, the dashed lines where you chisel out, slam some wood in there and wet it and whatever. We don't see those marks. So the only thing left to us is like, there's these balls laying around here. This must be what caused these marks. And that's literally most of the evidence for it. Like he's just like, hey, this must be the case. And so, you sort of can I guess you can look at it and think about it. So, but there's a bunch of problems with that theory when people dig into it. Now, one of the things that I highlighted in the video was that there's been a bunch of tests done. Like, so Engelbach did some with his work where he basically went and tested what rate of material removal can you get from pounding stones. Like, slam on this granite patch, how fast can I remove granite with the dolerite? And is it because you will remove the granite very slowly, basically in the form of granite dust, because the dolerite's slightly harder than the granite. You're pounding away. It's not the most pleasant thing to do, but you can test it. It's also been tested by Mark Lehner and Roger Hopkins, I think was his name, who was a stonemason, and these guys. Lehner's obviously the Egyptologist. I found a copy on eBay of the Nova documentary series where they did this work. It was called Obelisk. So they went and were tasked to try and create an obelisk, and very quickly had to resort to modern methods to get it done in any, they had a time frame they were working in, so they ended up doing it with power tools and bulldozers and stuff. But they tested it, and then you've also got who's the other, Dennis Stocks. So he's a famous kind of experimentalist, also in a lot of these documentaries with Mark Lehner and the Nova series. All three guys kind of tested it, so there's some understanding of the material removal rates. So you've got like vast disparities between them is the problem. Like Engelbach was like 25 times faster rate than Dennis Stocks, who was the one who measured it the most accurately. He actually measured by volume of stone removed with this pounding stone method, which is very, very slow. I think, where is it? It's like a couple of millimeters per hour. Not even that. It was God, I don't have the numbers right on me, but it would take, I think it was something like it takes an hour of pounding to remove half the volume of a golf ball's worth of granite.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's to give you an idea. So think about, or 3/4 the volume of a golf ball. So it's like look at the the unfinished obelisk, and it's got this giant trench all the way around it, and you just visualize that thing filled up to the brim with golf balls. Then add 25%, because it's 75% the volume of a golf ball, so another 25%, and that's how many hours it might have taken under optimal conditions with this pounding stone to dig that trench. Not to mention the fact that, well, you've got all this material that was removed on top of it. The trench around it's only 2/3 as deep as it needs to be for a square section obelisk, and then you've got to cut underneath it. There's all sorts of problems with pounding down and sideways and upways, because we've got this undercut issues. But the pounding stone theory itself, and there's some history here that's probably worth explaining. I didn't get into it in the documentary in the video, but the reason Engelbach had such a high rate, and this is kind of where the theory took hold. And then he did his rate, which is like something like 5 millimeters an hour was what he quoted. and literally all we have to go on is he said, well, I sort of pounded on a square, a foot square patch of granite, and I got it down 5 millimeters in an hour by pounding at various times in an hour. So he took breaks. And he said, well, and we just have to take his word for it. Then he assigns the ancient Egyptians 8 millimeters an hour because they're like, well, they would have been better at it than I am. So we'll just give you a 60% bump up in capability. The reason he was doing this is because there's an inscription on one of the Hatshepsut obelisks that says this obelisk was completed in 7 months.
Oh, yeah.
So he was trying to work backwards. He was trying to figure out, okay, how can I get to a rate that makes sense with this inscription on this obelisk of 7 months? And if you look at that particular obelisk and you sort of work it out, he kind of figured out, well, if it's 8 millimeters an hour, we're in the same ballpark as what Hatshepsut could have done. Now, again, this is like 25 to 30 times faster than any rate that Dennis Stocks or Mark Lehner had been able to do with all of their testing. And so you start to question, well, okay, what's this ancient legend mean? And this gets back into, I think this gets back into the topic of kind of reuse and recycling and reclaiming objects, because one of the things that I contend, and people talk about this a fair bit with obelisks, is that as good as some of those glyphs are on obelisks, and this is something that I've seen Yusuf talk about, and he's a stonemason and kind of makes this point pretty well on the site. As good as a lot of those glyphs are, they're still done by hand, and this is done in later periods of the Egyptian civilization. They had access to iron tools. You can still see the chisel marks in some of those glyphs. But on the obelisks themselves, the actual things themselves, in some cases, you'll see overcuts and saw cuts and things like that. You don't see any of that in the writing. So I think what's a likely situation here is that when those men wrote on that obelisk and said, we finished this in 7 months, I think they mean they finished the writing on it in 7 months.
Right.
I think there's a good chance that they had either, they had scaffolded their way up this thing and they figured out what they're going to write on it. They got all their craftsmen and artisans in there, and they carved it up and they had it finished and dedicated to Hatshepsut in 7 months. Because there's no way they could have done this with any pounding stone methodology. And this includes, like, there's supposedly, well, this is the quarrying, the shipping, the standing up, and the writing on it in 7 months. You couldn't dig that thing out in 7 months with that method, let alone all the other steps. So the only thing that makes sense to me in this situation is, well, if the timing is true, then it fits the reuse and inheritance scenario really well.
Right.
So you looked into the excavation of the unfinished obelisk. Did you, in any of that guy's documents, did he say that they found those dolerite balls in the rubble down in the, where they were excavating the obelisk?
Hundreds of them. Yep, they found them all over the place in the quarry. So as they excavated, so the quarry, if you go back and look, it's an interesting book. You can find his work, Engelbach's work, on archive.org if you want to look at the illustrations for yourself. I have a lot of them in the YouTube video. But it was covered, like, doesn't look anything like it does today. The obelisk itself was covered in something like 7 meters of debris, not just dirt and sand, but huge big quarried blocks. And there's actually like just chip fields, and there was roads over the top of it. It was all buried. Like they've removed a whole lot of material since then. So yeah,
so that's what I'm wondering is like say, for example, in the trenches around the obelisk, if there were dolerite pounders found. In other words, when that thing was cut, were there dolerite pounders left in the actual work site, or did they fall in there because of later people that were pounding stuff with them, or I don't know.
It doesn't specifically say they were in the trenches. I suspect he did find them there, and he would have found them at the bottom layers of a lot of. They found all over the quarry. What he said, everywhere they went, they kind of found these things. What's interesting about the pounders themselves, though, is that most of them were broken. Like, he doesn't. That's the thing. You don't see a lot of broken ones there now because they've removed most of them, and the ones they leave there are the whole ones where you can pound away on the stone yourself and try it out. But most of them were broken, and this isn't an easy thing. With dolerite balls, you're not going to break them by pounding. Like, Engelbach did some experiments, and he's like, how did these break? How come most of them are broken? He said he had to go up 10 meters or 30 feet and repeatedly just throw a ball down onto a big pile of other dolerite pounders multiple times, and then eventually
that's-
he'd get one to split and break.
That's a great point. Like, you're not going to break it using it the way they say that they were being used.
Yeah.
That's right.
But you could break it if they were like ball
Rollers,
bearings or
ball
something.
bearings,
Exactly.
a rolling
Yeah.
giant.
Yeah.
You got a 1,200-ton load on top of those things, and you could imagine maybe once you snapped, if you think of like a obelisk or a big, huge block of stone in a trench, like you've dug it out of this thing, you put these balls underneath it, and you somehow snap this thing off its spine.
Yeah.
Now you've got a little bit of flexibility. You could maybe lever that thing around. You could get underneath it and chip away the spine. You could put straps. You could put stuff underneath it. So it might have been desirable to have some, like almost like ball bearings exactly underneath it to move.
And this would make
move a little bit.
This would make all the pits the way they. So when they were undercutting, the obelisk is tilted, right? The whole thing is at an incline. So if the surface at the bottom was smooth, all the rollers would roll to the bottom. But because they're scooped and scooped and scooped, then the you can position all of those rollers all the way down the side.
Oh man,
and they would stay put.
That's a great. I hadn't even thought of that. That's a great observation. Yeah, very, very interesting actually. That might because that was the other point, right? It was like there's no point to dig those scoop marks at the bottom of the trench.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
Unless you need rollers to stay there.
Unless you need a pit for a roller, right? Because otherwise, if that, half a golf ball in an hour, there's no reason to dig down lower than the ridges because that's the level you're trying to get to.
Huge waste of time if you're pounding it away.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that does make sense because that's what we see too underneath that one wedge-shaped block where we've got the undercuts. It's in a area kind of up above the obelisk itself.
Okay,
but that's exactly what we see.
When we go back, we should collect a bunch of the pounders and put one in each of the scoop marks all the way up the side and take a picture of it.
Yeah. There you go.
We'll do Operation Distractor. I'll get you guys down into the trench. You just got to film it for me because I got in there on the first trip, but they were yelling at us last time and they wouldn't let us on it. But
right,
we'll see. It's going to be busy. I think this next trip, we'll see how much we can get away with.
Well, we'll wait because we're gonna have so many people. We'll wait until they're distracting them somewhere else.
Yeah,
and then we'll put them in the trench.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, people are asking about heating the stone before pounding on it. Is that possible?
Sure.
Did you see any of that in the reading?
So they did a little bit. Yeah. So there's some evidence for that, like that happened. But I would also say that there's evidence for multiple types of quarrying. Like we just have evidence for almost every type of quarrying imaginable. It was a source for granite probably throughout the ages.
Right.
So, and Hopkins did a little bit of testing with this too. They sort of run a fire on the granite for a while and then bashed off some material. It doesn't seem like you can get a whole lot more material out that way. You might be able to get a little bit more, I guess.
I think what you would do is heat it and then pour water on it.
That's right.
And then pound it out.
Yeah. So, and there's some evidence that suggests that the dynastic Egyptians were doing some things like that. Like they were gathering reeds, they were drying reeds, they were burning the reeds. But I would like to see it tested. To be honest, there is some testing I think that's been done on some of this, but it's not. I wouldn't call it conclusive by any means. But it would be an interesting experiment to really to transparently go and look at. Like, okay, can we actually when you take into account the effort and the time required to gather the materials, make the fire, heat it up for long enough, quench it, then clear away the mud that's going to form, then pound up, then hit it and get that material out, versus just like constantly pounding on it. Are you actually removing more material per hour than the other way? I don't know. But there's for sure there's like burnt bricks. They found burnt bricks in parts of the quarry, so it looks like they made mud bricks and they may have made areas to contain a fire. And there's in some other areas apparently there's like little burnt bits of granite. But I just wonder, like, I'm not an expert at this, but it's like, to me it's like, how much granite are you really heating? It's not like we're talking about pebbles, it's like bedrock. Right. How far is that heat really going to go? Are you going to get much more than a couple of millimeters of granite off that thing from the heat? And it's just regular fire. It's not like it's propane, like an oxyacetylene torch or anything.
It would take a long time to get it to heat it hot enough to just, because most of the heat's going up, and then once you get underneath the work, what are you doing? Because then all the heat's going straight into the work where you don't want it to split. And
right.
Yeah, just I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough question. But again, I'm not really certain that explains the scoop marks. even if they were quarrying that way. So I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit of
Still
an
doesn't
unknown, but
explain scoop marks.
I also think it's I don't know what to think about this, but I think it's weird that thing is tilted.
yeah, right.
There's something, I don't know, I feel like there's something there that unfinished obelisk is not flat. You know, I don't know. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what to think about it, but it seems like you would cut it out of there flat.
Yeah.
When you look in quarries, and at least in modern day
We
quarries,
do
they
it
don't,
flat.
you know, yeah, they're always the lines are
Isn't the
horizontal.
what is it? The Moai statue, the unfinished one, is that one also tilted, right?
It looks like it's a little tilted.
Looks
Yeah,
like it's tilted. Well,
And-
go ahead.
I was gonna say that the blocks in the Baalbek quarry are also on a tilt, but that may be sinking. It's not clear that they're not attached to the bedrock anymore. So
I think the one on the bottom beneath the stone of the pregnant woman is still attached.
oh, okay,
I
Maybe
think
it's
and
still
it is,
attached,
and it
yeah.
is tilted.
And it's tilted.
Yeah.
So it's like they didn't care that it was
Yeah.
tilted.
Well, it's a
Or-
9 meter difference on the obelisk. So the top is like 9
Yeah.
meters, like 30 feet, plus,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Different.
But now, if lifting and maneuvering the stone wasn't really the biggest problem, the biggest problem might be finding
Solid granite.
the best piece of
Yeah, the good
stone,
granite,
right?
yeah.
So you wouldn't care what the angle was. It's like, oh, this is a good piece of granite all the way down to here.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah.
like it. It seems like it because that's the thing that gets me about this stuff. You know, when you look at and it's I probably should do a better job of digging into this topic because I try in
Yeah,
a few
Ben.
of the videos.
You've done a terrible job so far.
Well,
It's a terrible job.
it's the extrapolation of that good granite. You know, like every time you take stonemason or people that understand granite, and I've learnt to kind of recognize some of this. But you go to Giza, or the second pyramid, third pyramid, you look at some of the cut pieces of granite, and it's huge, and same as these boxes, like these huge crystal occlusions in them, like big chunks of quartz in this stone. This is not the type of granite that we like to work with today because it's the hardest thing to cut. Like finding granite with huge crystals in them like that, it just makes it so much more difficult to work. But that stuff is everywhere. Like I'm talking probably be millions of tons of it over the course of everything. At least millions of tons. Like tens of thousands of blocks and big blocks and columns and single pieces. All of that had to be carved out. Like that extrapolation of using these tremendously slow and painstaking kind of manual techniques and trying to explain the just sheer scale of work that happened with those things. I think it starts to border on the ridiculous to me. Like I said, I'd like to maybe dig into that at some point and try and extrapolate like just how many hours, how many people are we talking? Because I think there's some estimation about population size. In ancient Egypt. So I think that'd be a fun exercise to try and work through because, I just don't know, you know, like okay, so we're grinding with copper bars and how much copper do we require because it eats away at the copper at this rate and it takes this slow. Oh, and we're pounding. So let's assume we had to pound out all this material out of this bedrock, you know, all this granite stuff and just start to add up some of that math and see just how many people and how many hours it might have taken. I think we'd find it would be astronomically stupid.
Where were they getting those pounding stones, by the way? Is there a source for those? Does anybody know?
I mean, it's everything I read. It's like, well, river-worn rock, so they must have somewhere in the Nile, I guess, or somewhere like that, where or in some wadis
So they were
or something.
naturally rounded dolerite stones.
So they're like,
already,
okay, go up and down the Nile and find
Yep.
round, like this sort of similar sized round pounding stones.
Yeah. Oh, and you need, by the way, also a few thousand tons of copper at least, just to, because that was the other when you look at the sawing and the grinding mechanisms. I mean, everyone's like, oh, they grind on it with sand. Sure, but it also eats the hell out of the copper. Like,
Right.
Copper it turns into dust. I mean, it's just you'd have to basically replace your saws after every cut, just about. So that's a lot.
Right.
And we've not found a single copper drag saw. You know, we've not found a single tube drill. We've not found anything like that.
Right.
We found some flimsy copper chisels and some, you know, like that don't do anything, and we know this. And Roger Hopkins is sit there banging away on granite with a copper chisel, or bronze even, does nothing. So as much as we theorize about some of these techniques, this is what Yusuf also says that's really interesting, is that they found a lot of saws and tools that they used on wood. For sure, they use these things to make their wooden artifacts, but we've not found a single copper drag saw, a single tube drill, anything like that is meant for this stone. The only thing they found are these little copper chisels, pounding stones, and flint chisels. So even the mainstream story of well, it was drag saws or it was tube drills that were just rubbed on sand. There's no evidence for it. Like there's no tools. The where are the tools argument applies equally to the
Right.
standard version that it does to anything alternative. So
Yeah, it seems like there would be evidence of all that copper use, even if it was just I don't know, dust. Yeah, you would have like huge green areas.
It isn't. I mean, we see copper tinges on places where there were copper insets. So I remember there's like a great example of a section of an obelisk that had glyphs on it at Abu Sir, and there's like some of those are green because there were these copper insets on that, and it's a good example of like, well, that's never going to last long. People are going to grab that and take it, and it's all gone.
Right.
So that's exactly what happened. But yeah, there's no, there's a funny reference Petrie made at one point when he was first investigating some of these saw cuts, and these are like the circular saw cuts and the tube drills. He has this one, I can't quite remember exactly how it goes, but it was along the lines of, well, he sort of found one of these saw cuts, and he thought that's strange, and he noticed there was a powder in there. There was it wasn't copper, it was something else. And he went, oh, that's interesting. Moved on, kept doing stuff, and eventually, a day or two back, came back to it because he was on his mind. He came back, I want to get some of that. And then when he came back to it, it was gone. Like there was no more of this residue left or this powder, and he's like, damn it. He actually makes a point saying, wow, we could have had a clue there as to what this material might have been because there was something in this saw cut that he had uncovered, and it was just gone when he got back. So
Rookie move.
Yeah,
Petrie.
rookie move, Petrie. And it's fascinated me to think like, oh man, what could that have been? Because he does state it's not copper. It wasn't that green copper thing. It was something else. So maybe it was, there's just no evidence of diamond use. Like we don't know what they used to cut these things, or what technique or tool tip or whatever. But we just
Petrie favors the gems, right? He talks about jeweled tips.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been diamond, so something else.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the other one, but he was saying it's been found in other places around.
Topaz or corundum, sapphire.
Yeah, corundum.
Yeah. Well, he says like the obvious thing. He says diamond. Like he does say like this would, but there's just no evidence to support diamond. Like there's literally no. And other people say, oh, it's diamonds. Like there's just nothing to support that in dynastic Egypt. Like they just don't ever talk about diamonds. They've never found any. They seem to have valued the colorful gems. They don't think they found, like if it was like a white gem, they wouldn't have cared, or a clear gem.
I would imagine that if they were using like our modern day diamond tip saws, like these diamonds are really small, and then by the time you're done, they're either they break off, and I mean you've got all this dust from cutting stone. Are you going to just look at this pile of dust and be like, oh yeah, there's a diamond in there? Especially if you're in the desert where there's a bunch of sand. Like, no.
Yeah, no.
This is going to take a forensic analysis to find these diamonds. And so it would be cool if there are, future quarry sites that are uncovered and had not been previously excavated, that we could go down there and then actually collect some of the dust in the very bottom and analyze it with a microscope and see if there's any tiny pieces of jewel.
Yeah.
Yes,
or diamond or whatever.
Things that would all make sense if the mainstream actually cared about really digging into some of this
right,
stuff.
Yeah.
I think so, right? Because I mean, there's quarries. There's the Wadi Hammamet quarry. I'm sure there's some excavation that could be done there. There's like a black granite site in the eastern desert. There's a basalt quarry that's just north of the Fayum region.
That would be
the
a
western
place
side.
to look to.
Yeah. I actually want to try and see that if it's at all possible at some point. But
well, we should bring a plastic bag, bro.
That's right. Let's take some samples, dude.
Some granite. Yeah, let's get some basalt. It's even tougher. Yeah, it's tough to say. Like, there's I think there's definitely some things we could do to try and figure that out. But I think there's no chance of finding anything at the Aswan quarry.
Right. Yeah, it's been cleared out.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's just
been cleared out.
You can go there and create granite dust.
Well, like you were saying, if only the mainstream cared. Like, just the number of pits and various things that we saw, like on Giza, on the plateau there, that just, it's like, have they ever been dug out? Have people really gone down in there? Or like, why is it full of rubble?
Yeah.
How far down does it go? Do we actually know any of this? And, there's like this kind of lock on archaeology in Egypt that makes it very difficult to do anything. Like, I
Yeah.
want them to go into the Valley Temple and just tilt one of those freestanding columns and scratch a little stone off the bottom of it and then do a luminescence
testing. Yeah.
testing on it and see how long that thing's been standing there.
Sounds like it makes sense to me. I'd love to see that
Yeah.
as well. Like, yeah.
You know, you could do that in the Osirian. You could do that in Peru. Like, you know, there's this idea we can't date stone, but we could date the bottoms of some of these very large blocks if you just can go in and tilt one and get a sample off the bottom and do a luminescence
I think you might have to pull the whole column up out of its socket.
in the
Maybe.
Osirian. Yeah,
I bet you that thing goes down quite a ways.
you're probably right.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it'd be difficult, but it's doable. Like you said, like, could we
Yeah.
build? You were talking about, like, could we do it? We could. It's just it's
Yes.
a matter of willpower and money, and
Yeah.
just and desire. It's like, it's just do we care? It's just, it feels like that a lot of the times they're not interested in doing stuff that's going to rock the boat, but at the same time, I'm hopeful that the muon detection shows us something in the Great Pyramid. We don't know.
Yeah.
I want them to do that thing to the other pyramids as well.
right. Definitely to the Bent Pyramid. I was really thinking about how all that stuff we climbed around in the Bent Pyramid was below the bend,
Yeah.
way below
Yeah.
it.
Even
Yeah.
and Khafre Pyramid as well, because that's you're pretty much at
Yeah.
ground level for all that stuff.
Yes.
I mean, it's a little bit into the superstructure, but not much. There's a tremendous amount of stuff above it.
Yeah. All right, let's take a
Excuse
break,
me.
and we'll get some beers, and we'll be back for the second half of the show.
Indeed. All right, Chad, I muted the podcast. You guys are the only ones who get to hear me cough like that.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance that you have to print yourself, or draw with a crayon, or dust off the old typewriter, or something. And we are joined by Ben from UnchartedX, and we are talking about, we're just kind of rambling about ancient mysteries and the builder culture, and what we think about the processes and the methods they may have used, and is there a connection around the world to many of these mysterious ancient sites where they seem to have preferred megalithic blocks, where there's sometimes anomalous stone cutting or evidence of anomalous stone cutting possibly, and the seeming ridiculousness of the tools that the standard model of archaeology tells us that were being used to make these structures and these objects. And Ben, have you looked much into the Stonehenge and the other stuff over there in the?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Haven't visited them. It's on my list now.
We gotta do that,
now that
yeah.
the UK's opened up, and after talking with Hugh Newman quite a bit about it, I've always been fascinated, and I would love to have him show me around
Yeah.
over there. I think that'd be a great way to do it. I've looked a bit into it, so it's interesting. You have we talk about the megalithic culture existing all around the world. The other thing that I was thinking of is that seems to be a constant, and definitely you get degrees of difficulty or of I guess achievement in this, but pyramid culture itself seems to be something of a constant, right? That's we get pyramids all over the world as well, and maybe that's just this is the way we build the staircase to the gods or to the sky or whatever. Maybe that's how we solve these problems. But China, South America, all over the place, we've got pyramids and evidence for pyramids.
Yeah, it's just what are we talking? It's just the easiest way to stack up rocks, Ben. Just
Yeah,
make
maybe
giant-
that's it.
Make giant triangles.
You know what this desert needs? Giant triangles.
That's right. You know what this desert needs? Some giant stone triangles. Well, the other site we were talking about in Utah was we were talking about Nan Madol,
Yes,
and
yes.
also how it's somewhat similar, at least to the top parts of Gunung Padang. I don't really know how to
Gunung
say it
Padang.
properly. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, and
How they
that's-
use the columnar basalt.
Yes.
So
Columnar
at least
being another hard word to say.
yes, columnar. So yeah, the it's interesting how you see this. I don't know. I always think of it as Lincoln log construction, but they were using enormous sections of columnar basalt that they quarried from somewhere.
Yeah.
And from what I remember, I could be wrong about this, but the quarry site has not really been located, at least not for Nan Madol.
Right.
And they used so much of it that they must have practically dismantled a mountain of the stuff.
Yeah.
And this is another thing I wonder about, because it's just like, oh yeah, you just take this mountain apart and then you stack them up like this, and it's real simple, guys.
Yeah.
But how difficult is that to really do? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of good video footage from Gunung Padang in Indonesia, and where we
So you've been there?
No. But my buddy Luke, when we were working together, he went there, and so I have hours of footage. I do want to get there. It's a place I'd like to go, but I have hours of sort of detailed video footage up and down that place, from the top down kind of the sides of it, and that appears to be a similar deal where it may well be a man-made, just massive pyramid, or pyramid shape,
the whole hill. Yeah,
possibly, yeah, because the pictures that you can see in this is. Like of the excavations, it's definitely like been stacked up. Like there seems to be, it's not the natural kind of formation at the bottom. It looks as stacked as because 100% the terraces on top of Gunung Padang were formed from columnar basalt, and they were man-made. But it looks like that at the bottom where they've done excavations as well. It's just that whole place is just covered in jungle, so it's kind of difficult to clear off and really figure it out. And then you've got all the debate about the chambers and the organic dating that's been pulled up from there. But yeah, Nan Madol, where was it again? We figured it out. It was somewhere in the South Pacific.
Micronesia,
I think it was. Yeah.
I think the island is called Pompeii.
Yeah, that's right. And it's underwater, right? So that's the other thing.
Yeah, most of it's underwater. I mean, what we see, and the parts of it that are sticking above water are on basically man-made islands. So it's off the coast, and it just seems like a lot of work to build what looks like a kind of a city or a village, I guess you would say. I don't know what it was initially, but it just seems to me it's another example of like, what's the hardest possible way to do this? You know, let's do it out of gigantic, columns of columnar basalt.
Yeah,
that weigh hundreds of tons in some cases.
That's big basalt. Yeah, that's huge. That's a lot bigger than the stuff you see at Gunung Padang. But
right, these things are huge. Some of them are absolutely enormous.
Wow.
So it just, I don't know, and it's, the local legends about it, like was just mentioned in the chats. The legends is that they were floated into place.
Right.
That they were whistled or sang or. And but basically floated into place. And I don't know, there's just the legends about these places, about how it was done overnight, or it was easy. So
it's another commonality, right? It's another part of the big picture. You have that in Tibet, you've got that in South America, you've got that in Egypt in some cases, of floating the stones or singing the stones or whistling the stones or using the like the Tibetan one that had that Swedish guy go. There's a really interesting story.
Oh yeah.
I still have on my note. I have this. I've been meaning for a couple of years to do like a deep dive into the acoustics and the legends of that type of thing. It's just like I'm trying to do it justice. But it's I haven't finished it yet, but it's something that's been on the back burner forever. But yeah, there's so many interesting stories when you dig into those legends and stories of people, somehow moving these stones with sound,
right?
Or I think there's a legend in Egypt of a particular type of stone underneath the stones that would somehow levitate the stone and they'd be able to push them along. Like there's stories that come from Egypt from that as well. Like there's some really interesting tales, and who knows how much you can attribute to the truth of them, but just the fact that these types of things exist from all around the world is like, this is
Well, I do have like it's not really skirpy, but it's a little bit on the whole resonance and floating the stones thing. But like, if you're not near a job site like a modern one, but you can hear it, all of our machines make whistling noises when they're operating too. So it's I don't know. Is it possible that the sounds they were hearing was machinery? I don't know.
Possibly.
Not sure.
You know what's interesting is when I looked into one of the things I noticed when I looked into this was if you can 3D print now. You can find designs for like a acoustic levitation devices, right? You power them up, and you can float small objects. It's interesting to note the shape of those devices because it looks like a half sphere. It's like this circular bowl almost type of shape is what gets used to create those sort of basic sort of acoustic levitation things. You can 3D print them or whatever. But we find these types of stones, and they're really mysterious in these types of shapes at some of these ancient Egyptian sites. You know, famously Abu Ghraib. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're like you have this cog bowl-shaped thing. You can think of it as like half a sphere or something like that. That's carved out of a block, but it's in a square foundation. So you could imagine these might have been in the ground or lined up. And I know we found a couple of these at Tanis as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Very ancient feeling stuff as well. And, you know, it's just, I don't know. I'm not saying that's what they were, but it's an interesting connection when you look at like, well, this is the shape that proves to be the most functional for kind of acoustic levitation that we can do today for small objects. And funnily enough, we have these crazy bowl shapes also existing in
giant
some
ones.
of these ancient sites. Yeah, huge and made from crystal, like
right.
And ones made from limestone as well. But you know, and we don't really have an explanation for what they are. And they're intricate. You know, they've got these crazy cog shapes on the outside. They've got holes drilled in them halfway down. I know Yusuf seems to think that that's where you would connect them, maybe pipes into them, and then that's how these might be connected into the underground system of piping and conduits that seem to exist underneath the ground at so many of these Old Kingdom sites, which is just to me also another whole mind-bending aspect of them that screams some sort of functionality.
Right.
Don't know, you know?
Yeah, the what do they call it? The sewage system? Is that what they were saying?
That's what they call it, yeah. Sewage system underneath, like made from granite or alabaster.
Yeah. It's so the one priest that lives in there can take a crap inside the temple, basically.
Yep. Someone should measure them for you get the 1.5 degree of down drop across foot there, son. Just make sure the thing flows downhill. Shit's got to flow downhill. I don't know. And then it collects into like a red quartzite bowl outside. Yeah, you have them from like fairly difficult material, like particularly the white quartzite, like this natural spring material that you've got to dig up from very specific places, transport
the calcite.
The calcite, sorry, quartzite, calcite.
Yeah.
White calcite. Travertine, whatever you want to call it. You see them made from granite. There's a block. You have them at Giza on the causeway up there in front of the middle pyramid. You've got a U-shaped block made from granite. We've got another one from that white calcite, and I know there's blocks like that from granite in the Sphinx temple. Not that I've been able to ever get in there and see it. Maybe that's something we can do in the future. But it's crazy. It doesn't seem like you would make them from that material if their purpose was to, carry on poop.
Right.
Do you know why that temple is closed? The Sphinx temple? Like, why is it closed?
I don't know. It's hard to get into. I've been discussing with Yusuf. There's maybe a chance we can get in there on this. We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. It's apparently it's difficult to get special permission now, but apparently it is possible now. But it's not. It's very rare. So we're definitely going into the Sphinx enclosure. So we are. News for anyone who's coming on the trip. I am working on maybe the ability to get in to see it, because the Sphinx temple, for people get confused about what this is. It's sometimes people think it's the Valley Temple. It's not. It's kind of, if you're looking at the Sphinx and the Valley Temple, it's to the right of the Valley Temple itself. So there's like a whole megalithic structure like the Valley Temple, but it's in front of the Sphinx, and it's got a bunch of interesting details, and it's shut off to the point where literally the gates that get you into it are welded shut. Like they've been welded shut for a long time now.
That is weird.
And so Robert Temple has some good photos from in there. He does some lectures looking at some of that stuff where I know, because that's how I know there's U-shaped blocks in there. There's a few things in there. I don't think Yusuf's ever been in there either. So yeah, it's been shut for a long time. But I'd love to get in there just to see it and document it.
Yeah, I just think it's strange that it's closed like that. I don't know.
Who knows,
it's a
man.
little weird.
Yeah, that's the trend, I mean, that's been closed for a long time, but it's if they keep cutting off access to places. Although it's nice. I mean, Egypt's slowly opening up. We've had the change in leadership over there, so
Right.
they've definitely made some things a little easier to get into. Particularly in the last few years, it's been great. Like they've opened up the Bent Pyramid, Step Pyramid, Osiris Shaft, like stuff you just would have been very difficult, let's say, to get in to see before that.
Yeah.
Anything's
That's another one. The
possible.
Osiris Shaft. We could you could do luminescence dating from stuff at the bottom of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that box that's down in there
Box
in the
that's
water.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, that might not tell you that might not give you the dating for the shaft itself, but it could tell you how long that box has
Box has been in there.
down there.
I'd love that.
And with
That box.
Serpent.
Yep. Makes
Yeah,
you
the
wonder if
Serp-
that.
The
Sorry.
Serapeum as well, because
Tilt one of those boxes up and get a little sample from the bottom.
yeah,
We'll
exactly.
push it. We'll all get together and we'll give it a
Yeah.
shove and
Yeah.
we'll try and do a scratching underneath it. I think we can make it tilt.
I'll get a copper lever and we'll tilt it up. So I want
All of us.
I want to go back to the discussion about the possibility of some of these structures being much older, as you were saying, possibly like maybe 30, even 60,000 years old. But the idea that the tools used on these job sites were perhaps made of some other material like steel, or just a harder metal than copper, and that they might have been massive machines that were doing this work. And if the job was abandoned and these tools were left on the job, just looking at the amount of stonework that has been quarried from existing sites over the thousands of years that those sites have been around, the amount of tearing down of the site to reuse that material, I would imagine these machines, if they had some kind of steel or metal on them, that metal would have been mined right off of the machine for thousands of years, and even to be used as like spear points. So it's like you can imagine one scenario is that the machine itself sits there untouched and just slowly rusts, and then now it's going to be a red stain in the ground.
Yep.
But I don't think that would happen. It wouldn't get to that point. It would be broken down into pieces, and those pieces would be cut up into pieces, and those pieces would be cut up into pieces to the point that it was like, tips on spears.
Yep.
And scattered all over the place. They could have been traded for thousands of miles.
Yeah.
Over the thousands of years that they were there, and they would have been known sites to go get that material, the only places to get those materials.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I look at it. Like, where are the tools? Well, if there were any large tools, they have been scattered over thousands of miles into hundreds of thousands of pieces.
Yeah. It's a great point. I make that's the where are the tools argument. That stuff doesn't last. Like people wouldn't not have a clue what they were looking at, and it's just some hard material that you beat on with a rock until you take a piece of it, and
right.
you can repurpose it one way or the other.
Yeah, right. And that
metal doesn't last.
You would be able to build a fire under it and get it to melt into a little piece of it to melt, and then you could beat it off of there and shape it into something that you needed, and and then those little pieces would have easily rusted away. Mm-hmm. And so the question is there a place where a tool was left that hasn't been found, right? That hasn't been uncovered, that was perhaps protected from the elements?
Well, we have one example that I can think of. I mentioned this in Utah as well, which is the Antikythera mechanism.
Oh, right.
I think that's an example of... we can't really explain that. Like, anyone who really looks into the Antikythera mechanism, it should upend your whole view of history. Like, it's just an incredible artifact. Like, and it's insanely complex and precise, and it's like... That's not a prototype, right? They probably made lots of these, and they may have existed for a long, long time. And the only reason the damn thing we even know about it is because it sunk to the bottom of the sea and it was being corroded by the ocean, and it would have disappeared eventually as well, but it was found on a shipwreck, and as bad shape as it was, just by x-raying it and doing all the scans and the analysis of it, we've been able to determine all these things about it. But if that type of a mechanism had been somewhere else, it'd be long gone. Like, as you say, melted, busted up, just reused, everything. Metals, there's a reason we don't find metal on these sites. They're so rare to find.
Right.
Some of these things. But is it possible that that we'll be able to find some of these tools on a site somewhere? Maybe. It's. I think it takes
it would have had to have been hidden from the ancient people for like the entire time. Basically, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes,
it doesn't
would
have to just sit and rust away. Right, it's going to be taken.
That's right.
Some people in the chats earlier were suggesting that maybe some of the tool bits became the Egyptian crowns.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Oh, that's the drill tip.
Yeah,
that's what the bowling pin hat thing is.
Maybe. Yeah, it was exactly. Yeah, it could be something that. Actually, that's a great idea. It could possibly be that way, and I think it also has. It's not just that it would have to have been hidden from ancient cultures. I think you have another kind of qualifier you need to add into it, which is that you almost have to, if this is going to be at an undiscovered site, it's going to almost have to be a situation where it's a tools down situation they had to leave, because who leaves their tools on a job site? Like the thing is, these probably were valuable, and as much no one today, like when you finish your house, you don't leave all your tools laying around, right? You take them with you, you put them somewhere else.
Johnson leaves at least one.
Johnson, okay. Yeah. So maybe we find Johnson's 10mm wrench, or socket wrench, or whatever, which is the thing everybody always loses. We can find a hole. This is where all the 10mm sockets are. But so it's like it's doubly difficult, I think, because I don't think that they would leave the tools on the job sites, which are the sites that we're, the monumental sites that we're looking for. So yeah, it's a needle in a haystack, in a field of haystacks kind of thing. It's
that's why I wonder about the Osirian. If Seti the First, he gets his engineers out there and they uncover that thing, maybe there were tools in there.
Maybe, yeah.
When they uncovered it.
Yeah, because the idea that so many of these megalithic sites are just unfinished, and it looks like they just stopped in the middle of the job.
Yeah.
You don't take your tools home from the job every day. Like, you rent the crane.
Right.
And it's there until you're done using it.
That's right.
Yep.
And if one day you go home and then some crazy shit happens and you never come back, then the crane stays there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea I was working off of. Or even at the quarry itself, it's like, if you're quarrying, you have machines that are built on site.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
at least that's how we do it now. We don't know what their tools looked like. I mean,
of course, yeah. It's just,
but you just imagine that some of them must have been enormous. Like, that's just the implication that you get.
Yeah, I guess my main point is wherever the tools are, because you might have a yard where you keep all the tools. You know, if you're a business and you're I'm Pyramids 1. Like Max Pyramids,
AAA Pyramids,
AAA Pyramids. Like, we have a yard with all of our pyramid tools. And when we get a job, we move all the tools to the job and start doing the job, and then we bring them back and they sit in the yard and get maintenance. So it's like, if a cataclysm wiped these people out, or something happened and they never came back, those tools would have been
left on the job.
Yep.
Either not necessarily on the job, but in the yard.
Yeah.
And people would have known about it. Is my point.
Yes,
so,
that's right. So we have to find a tool or a set of tools in a very specific situation where, sort of like Göbekli Tepe, where it was buried in antiquity and no one knew that it existed for 12,000 years, and it wasn't uncovered, it wasn't taken apart, it wasn't destroyed, it wasn't, the elements didn't. About. And so we uncover it now, and it's practically pristine because it's been completely unknown and buried for this whole time.
And it has to be in a site, that would have the conditions that would not completely destroy the tool or the materials that it was made of.
Because it could still be tens of thousands of years.
Exactly.
Or more. But yeah, you're right. I think that I'd like that'd be a good site option for that time machine question, right? Like when Seti the First dudes uncovered the Assyrian. Yes. What they actually found there.
What they found in there.
What they found and what happened with it.
So that's the thing that makes me wonder about the step pyramid and all those vases or stone jars and bowls and stuff that are found under there. That to me looks like somebody found these artifacts and collected them all.
Yeah.
In this place.
Yeah. So where do they find those?
So I'm wondering,
right,
is there a place where ancient peoples found this tool that they knew, like, oh, this is what the gods used to make these structures, and they revered it and stuck it in a tomb somewhere to try to preserve it.
Yeah.
Maybe that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of tombs got robbed. I mean, even
Yeah.
some of these step pyramid stuff, a lot of it's busted up. There was just such a proliferation of those things. They didn't take it all. And I mean, and that's funny enough when you mention the jars. I do like to point out to people that that's literally the mainstream story as well. Like that they were heirlooms. They were just heirlooms from the first and second dynasty, because apparently that was the time where they had all the capability to make amazing stone jars. It's only the first and second dynasty. They stopped doing it after that. It just wasn't worth it, I guess.
Okay, so even the mainstream says that they were put in there. Oh, okay.
Yeah, on the wall of the museum in Saqqara, when they talk about it, they're like, "Yep, they found all this stuff, and these." He said most of these are heirlooms from the first and second dynasty. They just say that. It doesn't.
Yeah.
They just assume that. Like, it's like, well, how do we know that they're not like the first and second dynasty? They weren't heirlooms from them as well. It's like,
Yeah, didn't you say there was one found in a much older?
Well,
burial?
Yeah, that's right. So there's one from that was had carbon dated material to around 12,000 years ago, and it's stone vases. It's not pottery. Like, I've heard that people are like, oh yeah, but he's talking about this site with the pottery vases. They're not pottery. They're stone vases. There's a difference. So yeah, some people think it's pottery on that site. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It was a site that was uncovered in the 60s. It's like a pre-dynastic site, but yeah, the material in that burial was dated to about 12,000 years old, and there were stone vases in it. And there's a couple of pictures of it in the Aswan Museum, I believe. And yeah, and then the schist disc, some of the most complicated, incredible bits of stonework. That was a first dynasty Sabu, I believe, the first dynasty prince named Sabu in his tomb. And then you have most of these, the 40,000 plus of them were under the step pyramid, which is Djoser, I think the last pharaoh of the third dynasty. And that it says there, even in that museum, it says, most of these were likely heirlooms from the first and second dynasty of kings. Which is okay. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
Because, there's no other evidence of that type of capability of stonework from first and second dynasty structures. So I guess they were, you know what I mean? Like, they obviously had the capability to work that stone, but you don't get, like, there's no other evidence for it in the stonework. The real good stonework allegedly doesn't really start until the third and fourth dynasties. So.
Right, the fourth, yeah.
But then you have then it ceases with all of there's no more stone vessels made after that. Just
right.
Kind of, it doesn't make any sense.
They were done.
We've got 30,000 of these.
We made 40,000. That's all we need.
Joseph has them. We don't need to redo that. We'll move on to the big stuff. It's one of those many contradictions in the author, the standard model timeline. It's kind of silly when you dig into it. It's another big factor for me. It's like there's so many contradictions in this story that just doesn't make any sense. Like the whole flow of the civilization in our orthodox timeline just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
it favors another interpretation, I think, but that's just me.
I also wonder, the schist disc is sort of famous, but I wonder how many other artifacts there are like that, because that thing is, because you have all the vases and the jars and the bowls, but that thing is not any of those things. It's something else, and
it's a Zep Tepi ashtray, dude. That's what I'm saying.
It does look like a giant smoking some huge cigars, but it's just. I'm sort of hoping that with the opening of the new museum, maybe they'll have more of those kinds of artifacts, because they're supposedly they're supposed to uncover a bunch of stuff that had been in storage for forever.
Yeah,
we might get to see some new stuff.
I hope so. I mean, I've got photos of the literal just shelves and shelves and shelves and warehouses of all these things. So yeah, I'm really hoping they dust off a lot of that stuff and put it out to pasture, because it's. Yeah, I hopefully think the same thing. There's got to be other stuff in there.
Yeah,
and they don't just hopefully
where
they
did you
just
get those
bury.
Photos?
Well, just from the books. There's the old books like Jean-Pierre Loyer, the guy who pretty much did most of the excavation work on the step pyramid. Like, you should see the shelves and the warehouses they filled up from all the stuff they dragged out from beneath that step pyramid. And we have a fraction of it that's on display in that Cairo museum. There's still warehouses full of that stuff. And I know it's a similar story with like the Valley of the Kings. They literally are using some of those tombs because they're more or less climate controlled. They just fill them up with all the stuff they found from the other tombs, and then they just close the door and leave it there. And so hopefully they're pulling a lot of that out and displaying it. One thing I sort of do object to a little bit, and it's just, I don't know, it's good and it's bad, but they're taking things like obelisks from sites. Like they've taken two of the big obelisks from Tanis. They're going to be over there at the museum, and it's sort of just it's like a little negative thing to Tanis. So.
Confusing future archaeologists.
That's right.
yeah. Well, it's certainly a habit, right? We love to take obelisks and ship them around the place.
We've been moving obelisks around for 4,000 or 5,000 years at least.
Yeah. Make your own.
Build your own obelisk.
Yeah, build your own.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that the people at Tanis were the ones who made the obelisks.
That's right. They might have moved them from somewhere else.
Stealing them and standing them up.
Possibly.
Yeah. All right. Let's take one more break, and we'll come back with the final segment with Ben from UnchartedX.
I'm finding the Blackadder.
It's
Landmine
chats.
Mysteries of the Ancient Builders with Ben.
What happens when you tread on a mine? There it is.
Is a challenge.
Well, quite. Come on, let's get out of here.
Oh, sir, just one thing. If we should happen to tread on a mine, what do we do?
Well, normal procedure, Lieutenant, is to jump 200 feet into the air and scatter yourself over a wide area.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent podcast, with Ben from UnchartedX. Final segment of the final hour of this, the 242nd episode of Brothers of the Serpent. It's been really great, Ben. As always, love talking about all this stuff, and
cheers.
I don't know. I really appreciate how you dig through the data of of all these past archaeologists and find little nuggets in there. It's been really awesome following your work.
Thank you.
And I really like that the latest video you did on the scoop marks and stuff in the quarry. So I highly recommend it to anybody out there who hasn't seen it yet. Is it still the latest thing on your feed? Well, I guess maybe this will be.
Yeah, this might. I don't know. This will definitely be a podcast. I might do a video on this too. But as of right now, for sure, the scoop marks is the latest video. Yeah. It's the only problem with doing all that digging and making an hour-long documentary is you can't put them out every week. It's like not exactly the standard YouTube model, but that's the way I'm doing it.
But it's polished, and I think people appreciate that. They know your style. You're doing the research. You're writing. Like you call it. I know you call it a script, but it's like you're writing.
Yeah.
Almost like an essay.
Yeah.
And then kind of, I don't know. It's just really cool the way you do it, and
thank you.
I always look forward to those coming out, and I even listen to them. Like I'm at work, I can't watch them.
Yeah.
So I listen to them. They're great to listen to, and then sometimes you're like, God, dang it, you got to go back, pull up the video.
I have to see that part.
About.
Yeah. What is he pointing at?
Yeah. I'm honestly, I have because I have a podcast now too. A lot of it, the videos, the audio from the videos have made into a lot of the podcasts, and I'm doing podcast specific content now too. But I think it mostly works for an audio format. There are some moments, of course, where it's like, hey, I'm talking about this thing here that we're looking at, but I think it's because of the process. I write them first, and then I arrange video footage around it. But there's, it's not the whole thing's not just look at this and look at this. It's occasionally I'll write something specific about a visual that I have in mind, but mostly it's just I'm just like writing about it, and you're just getting footage in the background of these sites and things. But thanks,
it's cool.
man.
So it's like we were at this Contact at the Canyons event in Utah, and we had a day off this time. Like there was an extra day thrown in, so it was like, well, people can kind of go do what they want. So we went to rent, the razors. We're like, Ben, You want to go? And he's like, I don't know. I saw this book in the lodge that was on the pyramids I hadn't seen before, and I think I'm going to go do some research. He's like,
That's right.
going there to read the book.
It's a book from the 1800s on pyramids that he hadn't seen.
That's
So
true.
He's
So,
not
yeah,
going to go
he's,
off-roading.
he's working, folks. He's out there digging through the books. It's great. And I when he told me he was going to go read it, I was like, well, can you read it out loud? Like, I'll sit there. I totally would.
Little bedtime story.
Just lose the fake British accent, though.
Yeah.
You inspired me, though, man.
His name is Ben, not Bin.
That's right. Your name is Ben, not Bin.
Bin. He's the guy with the fake British accent. That's the best. One of the best YouTube comments I've ever got. It's like,
Yes.
it's just like this double layered insult that's magic. It's just like, you're not only are you faking your accent, you're faking a British accent. It's like, God damn it, that's good. I'm faking it and it's the wrong accent. Like, whatever.
But yeah, I was gonna say you inspired me. Like, with I can't remember what video it was, but you were quoting all this stuff from Petrie. I suppose a lot of your videos have his work in there, but
Yep.
I was like, damn, I gotta I gotta get this guy's books. So somebody in the Discord, that was probably Jeff, threw me a copy, or I don't know how it happened, but thanks to the people in the Discord that helped me with getting that.
Oh, nice.
That book.
The Pyramids of Giza.
Pyramids and temples of Giza. Yeah.
Yeah, so it became like a nightly thing. I'd get home from
Giza.
work and everybody's gone to bed, and I'd just sit in there and have a beer for like 20 minutes every evening and just like read through this and scan through this book. And there's just some awesome stuff in there.
There is.
That broadens your perspective on all this stuff. So it's it's great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. That book. I don't know if it's chapter 12, is it? But it's the on the mechanical methods of the ancient Egyptians. That's a chapter that gets a lot of use. Yeah, it's good. It's all good stuff. You can find a lot of this stuff on archive.org. I'd like to get a few more of his actual books too, if I can, just for like a hard copy printout. But yeah. But you'd be amazed. You just start digging into what resources you can find out there, and it's one of the things that's led me to this conclusion. Like it's a point I make a fair bit. It's like the sort of the authoritarianism that's inherent in today's, I think, academia and Egyptology and archaeology isn't something that was always there. It's almost a modern phenomenon. I think it's something that's really only happened in the last 50 or 60 years. But that's it. That's the era we're living in. So it feels like, well, these guys are very resistant to saying, I don't know.
Yes.
But that's, and if you start to read the works of these guys, like Clements Marker or Petrie, or whoever I quote from a bunch of different sources, of the gentlemen scholars, the explorers, like the Victorian era almost, of people from 100 years ago, thereabouts, there's much more mystery there. Like they were willing, I think, to accept when there was something they couldn't quite understand. And my opinion on this, I think it's because of the nature of the debate. I just think that those guys were able to discuss this. And so Petrie spent his lifetime arguing with his peers about his claims about the drill cores and the saw blades.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, he was firmly in the, pyramids are tombs camp.
Well, yeah. And
he works out that, like, he does have questions about it, but at the same time, he's like, so they must have, stacked the plug blocks in here, and then they had to pull the body in through this part and climb over he's working out the scenario for the tomb.
He is, the way I look at that too is, it's like, I don't think they had the context for a more ancient past. I just don't think that was a possibility that in the head. So when I see Petrie talking about stuff like that, and him trying to reason about, well, the tube drills, they must have had bronze tubes embedded with jewels to make these marks. That's him. He's looking at the evidence and he's trying to like frame a solution based in what they know of the dynastic Egyptians. The idea that it's technology beyond that, or it was a civilization that wasn't them, it was older, isn't really a concept that ever gets explored or even thought about. It's only now, because they were thinking of, like, humans were basically in the Stone Age for 10,000. They probably thought that humans were around for like 25 to 40, 50,000 years maximum,
right,
at that point. If not even even shorter time frames. But it's only now that we have so much of this other surrounding context that supports the idea that things could be a lot older, and we've had the concept of cataclysm being proven out, that we can explore those concepts a bit. It's a bit easier to think of them. It's just to me, it's a context picture. But you can almost, when you read his writing, you can almost see him like scratching his head, thinking about it, because at the same time he's trying to, well, it's bronze tubes with jewels in it, but at the same time he's looking at the striations and he's measuring these spirals, and he's like, well, it's got to have had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tons on top of it, and
right,
and it doesn't make sense to me. You do that to a bronze tube, it's going to warp, and it doesn't matter how many jewels are in it, the thing's going to collapse.
You're going to crush it like a beer can.
Yeah, exactly. So,
especially how thin they were.
Yeah. So he was putting it in that context of where he thought the solution was, and I'm not sure he wouldn't have been open if he'd had all the data that we have today. That I'm not sure he'd have that same conclusion. I suspect he'd probably think, well, okay, there's some other possibilities here, but just the fact that there was a lot of back and forth and arguing, and they did that in the academic halls of residence. It's with his peers and in their letters and in their societies and in their institutions. But the whole nature of the debate now has shifted. You've got your Hancocks and your Beauvals and your the predecessors of those guys, the John Anthony Wests, and who does he always reference for the Luxor, the Schwaller de Lubitz. Yeah. So and this has all happened in the last sort of 50, 60 years. And the nature of the debate's changed. It's shifted, and it was in books for a while, and it's moving outside of the academic halls of residence, and all of that area. And now it's on YouTube, and as I often say, like, idiots like me can have a say and get an audience or whatever. So but it leads, I think, the academics who are the authoritative figures in this space, right? They're the ones who supposedly own this information. They're the ones who write the textbooks. They set and control the orthodox messaging. They create the standard model. So they and their authority, their sense of self-worth, all of these things are tied into that concept. So when it gets challenged from all these different vectors, I think that's sort of fed into this. The strong response that a lot of the stuff gets, which is just flat out denial or ignoring it, and unwillingness to really engage in debate in some of the topics. So it's unfortunate, but I think that's what's going on.
There's something about the way the information has fossilized, I guess is the term I would want to use, because like you guys are saying, Petrie's asking questions, and then these older Egyptologists, at least, were willing to say, I don't know, or that there's something strange here, or that we don't really have the full understanding of what was going on. But nevertheless, their discoveries get taught to the new generation of scientists, and then that gets taught, and those guys teach the next generation, and it becomes fossilized and set in stone, and all the questions that were there in the original discoveries are forgotten.
Yep.
In a way, and so it's just like, I don't know. I guess it's the loss of the questions that these older Egyptologists were willing to admit existed.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You're right, because Petrie is still considered like the authoritative source on a lot of measurements on a lot of these monuments. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to think that how little's actually been done in terms of surveying, accurately surveying some of this stuff for 100 years, and a lot of it, he's still like the best source we have for a lot of sites. But at the same time, and that's what gets put into textbooks, but they don't ever talk about the fact that he think there was 10 tons of pressure on top of a tube drill.
Right.
That doesn't make the cut somehow. But
stuff gets lost. I mean, Egypt is so, like, in terms of an archaeological site, it's so enormous.
Yes.
There's stuff everywhere. Like when we were out in the desert, I guess we were Abu Sir, Abu Ghraib, and you could kind of see, like, there were sites off in the desert where you could see the tell, that there's an area that's got stuff there. It hasn't been excavated. It's just out there in the desert. And I don't know. It's just such an enormous site. So data gets lost. I was amazed when we were going through Gantenbrink's story about how the exits for the king's chamber shafts had been lost, like where they were on the outside of the pyramid.
Right. Had to
You
go
know, it's like
searching
they-
around and try and find them.
Yeah, they knew they existed, and he knew that they had been found in the past, but nobody remembered where they were, or wasn't written down, or if it was written down, that was lost. So he had to go find them again.
I mean, it's even that way with the entrance, right? There's legends of the entrance.
Yeah,
At the time that
Alma Moon.
Alma Moon
Yeah.
shows up.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy how.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on that, you know, you can it is a little bit you can kind of understand it a little bit because you know you're talking about this enormous thing, and that I try to stress this to people that pyramid is just huge.
Oh.
It's 13 to 14 acres at the base. That's you know,
Yeah.
so if you're like, okay,
Well, yeah, I've got stuff on my property that I've lost. I'm like, wait a minute, where
did I put that?
where did I put that giant pipe? I know it's somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just tall grass. I still can't find it.
Right. Yeah. On 10 acres, you know, so you can imagine like, well, I've got a 14-acre structure and somewhere on it, there's a door.
Yeah.
So,
Somewhere's on like a 4-inch square opening, you know.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a 4-inch wide opening, whatever the hell it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy how big it is. And that you know, that's the scale of it that is lost on people until they see it. And,
But even then, when you're standing in front of it, you know, you're standing on the plateau and you're looking at it, it's huge. But you don't really begin to comprehend the absolute massive size of the thing until you start trying to circumnavigate it.
yeah. Yep.
You know, and you're like, okay, let's go over to this other pyramid over there, and you start walking. You know, and 10 minutes
Keep
later,
walking.
you're still walking alongside the same wall of the pyramid or whatever. And it's just you're like, yeah,
Yep.
this thing is gigantic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It really is. I tell you, it's one of those things you should it's go and see it if it's like a bucket list item if you're at all interested in these topics. Like
Yeah.
you want to see it at least once, like this place. It's you don't really. I always like, and I will always remember the first time going into Cairo and driving towards Giza. If you do it in the daytime, obviously at nighttime you can't see them, but the first second you see these things just like looming over the rest of the city.
Yes.
You know, it's just appear on this horizon in the backdrop, and you just realize like, holy shit, these are gigantic, like so much bigger than you think they are. I mean,
Yeah.
it was the tallest structure for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. Do you know if anybody's gotten to the top of the other one? Like, how often do people climb that one?
The Khafre pyramid,
Yeah.
that one would be a lot more difficult. I'm sure people
You'd have to. Yeah, you'd have to.
You need ropes and climbing gear for
Yes.
that.
Right.
You
Because the
just-
top still has the casing stuff.
Casing stones, yeah. Or you'd have to be like, you know, what's his Alex Honnold or something. Could probably do it, but you just stick your fingertips into the cracks and scamper
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah. And the bent
sure
pyramid,
people
I
do.
wonder about that one as well.
Oh, that one would be even tougher, yeah.
Yeah. It's real steep.
Land a lot more casing, yeah, got much more of the casing stones on that. I'm sure people have. I don't know. I don't know anything
Yeah.
about it, but I don't know. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I would have loved to have visited these places even 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, because then it was entirely possible and easy to like go up these things. There's a time before that where it was just like, hey, yeah, just if you're intrepid enough, off you go.
Yeah.
Climb that thing. Yeah.
Would you climb it? If they gave
Oh
you a
yeah,
chance?
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, if I could do it without getting like arrested and ejected
Thrown
from
in
Egypt,
jail.
never to come back,
Sure.
yeah, I would love to climb it. I mean, we
Yeah.
got on top of the satellite pyramid outside the bent pyramid next to it, you know. And
Yeah.
you can get on top of. I've been on top of the Abu Ghraib, the obelisk base. People think it's a pyramid. It's just a base for a gigantic obelisk. Yeah, I'd love the chance to climb it one day, but I don't know. It doesn't. I doubt that's ever going to happen. It's just like I could foresee like a potential. You almost don't want them to do it. Like obviously, there's the path people can take where you spend the whole money makes anything possible in Egypt approach. I understand that's still a possibility, but it's many thousands of dollars. You got to bribe everyone from the top down to the bottom. Apparently,
Yeah.
I don't even think even then I wouldn't do it just because of the risk. I want to keep going back to Egypt. I don't want to be sort of thrown out of that place,
Right.
which is what happens if they catch you.
I think what would be even better would be, I mean, I understand the idea of like, yeah, I climbed that thing, but what would be better is to bribe people to allow us to fly a drone.
Yeah.
And you can look at multiple like close-ups
Yeah.
and places that you wanted to see, and fly
That's-
to different pyramids and stuff, and
Yeah.
that would be cool.
You can do. I mean, the drone stuff is possible. It's just expensive and time.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
Yeah.
So I've seen drone footage, but it's
Yes.
just you got like the filming permits and production permits, plus then you army and I'm sure they probably want to know what you want to do with it. And there's probably only particular institutions that have the access that can do it. I'd love that idea too. But I was just thinking with the pyramid, like you could almost envision a place where they're like, well, for special permission, like enough money, they could make it an official thing. But if they had to do that, I reckon they'd have to install safety gear and all this other crap. You don't really want to see that. Like, when I'm like drilling into it and putting up chains and ropes and shit. And I'd just be like, nah, because it's dangerous. Like, I'm sure, I can't recall if this happened, but I'm sure there's people that have fallen off that thing and killed themselves in the hundreds of years that people have been climbing it.
Yep.
And yeah, it's like that thing. If you're going to allow someone to do it, you just don't want hordes of people going up and down all the time. But
right,
yeah. So it's just, I think it's I'll just live vicariously through the tales of people that have done it, like Hancock going up there and finding his grandfather's signature up there or whatever that crazy story is that he has on
that's
it.
That's a wild story.
Yeah.
So we are going to Egypt again in November, but I wanted to ask you what. You've traveled all over the place and visited many sites, but what other places do you want to go that you haven't been before, and for what reason?
There's a long list of stuff there. So the UK, for sure, with Stonehenge. There's a whole bunch of other stone circles. There's a lot of just interesting architecture there as well, not just the really ancient stuff. And personally, I also think it'd be really fun to like spend a summer chasing around crop circles. I don't know why. Like get on the radio and you just, hey, one's appeared, and everyone drives over there, and I think it'd be an interesting crowd. It should be fun.
I'm all in for that.
Yeah, like go chase crop circles around, because they do that, right? And Hancock does it. I mean, Hugh Newman gets involved in it, but just because there's a whole crowd that does it.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting. That's a big one for me. Turkey, haven't been there. There's Göbekli Tepe, plus a whole bunch of other places. That same thing for Jordan, Lebanon, with Baalbek's like a massive draw to me one day. I have a friend going there. Actually, I think he was there this week. I haven't heard back yet, but he apparently took some high-end filming gear.
I want to go to the quarry there.
Yeah, the quarry. Yeah, which is close to the site apparently.
If you're not moving 100 or 1,200 ton stone, yeah,
2,000 ton stone.
Close.
Yeah, it's close. Yeah, just some water.
Just over the ridge there. Yeah.
Yes, that's a big one for me too, man. I want to go. I want to go there.
Obviously, Petra, Jordan, all the sites in Jordan. There's a lot to offer there. Easter Island, man. Like, this is going to sound stupid, but I haven't seen like the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon at Teotihuacan, like in Mexico.
Yep.
I've been through the Yucatan a couple times, but like the southern part of Mexico and all of that. So many places. There's a lot of other places like Guatemala and Ecuador, and all these places have stuff to offer as well. I think that's interesting to go look at. A big part of me has been, and talking to people as we've been traveling the last couple of years, I've mostly been going to Egypt and Peru because that's where I could get to. But I've been really waiting for like Southeast Asia and that part of the world to open up again. I used to live in Singapore for a couple of years, and I love that part of the world. B, I miss diving. I did a lot of diving. I've done like 300 plus dives, and I think an underwater expedition to some of these places, Nan Madol's one of them, but also Yonaguni off Japan.
Yeah.
And you could combine that with a trip to like Cambodia, Angkor Wat, Indonesia, Gunung Padang, and hit that whole area. I think that's a very fascinating trip. You could bookend it with some really good diving, because like Sipadan, places like that are just fantastic diving. I just personally really miss diving. So there's a lot. There's
Malta.
I hope,
have you been to Malta?
Malta's 100% on the trip. I haven't been to Malta. I've been through Italy, though. Spent quite a bit of time looking through there. Europe's got a lot to offer. There's the Gothic cathedrals. I've always had like a little crazy itch to Gornaya Sharia in Russia. I mean, that's just quite an adventure even getting to that place to look at it.
Oh yeah,
that would be cool, like in Siberia. Just because apparently it takes several days, like off-roading in a vehicle, which I just like the idea of trying to do that. There's an endless list of stuff to try and do, I think. I love Egypt, and it's, I think Egypt's still like the best place to go to really absorb a lot of this stuff. Like it's Egypt sort of is at the top of the list for megalithic remains and ruins, but there's an awful number of sites out there as well that I haven't seen yet that I want to try and get to at some point.
Yeah, India too is full of.
Oh, India! I didn't make the list. India. I've been to India a few times, but I've sort of seen the Taj Mahal. Like there's so much, and I've been to a bunch of the cities, but there's so much more in India. Like I'm fascinated with the Barabar caves.
Yes.
Yep. All the temples. I like the work of Praveen Mohan. Like he shows so many interesting and intricate details of those sites that just boggle the mind. Ethiopia for that matter. There's stuff everywhere.
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, that's right. There's megalithic stuff there too.
Yep. I'm probably done with China though.
Templar temples.
Yep.
Go in there and uncover that pillar that's supposed to show how they cut those things.
Yeah.
You remember that from Signing the Seal?
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, let's do it. Go and see what's in that little church. Show me.
Yeah. Show me the ark. All right, guys. Well, you got anything else? Any other questions?
I guess you mentioned Barabar. How do you pronounce it? Barabar?
Barabar, okay, something like that.
Barabar
yeah.
cave. So did you see that on the BAM videos that they?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what they were looking at? They look like the precision flat surfaces of the Serapeum.
Yeah. They're even more precise. They're incredible. So if people haven't seen this, I'd recommend checking out Patrice Poyard's work. He's director of he also the writer director of Revelations of the Pyramids. Although I don't think he wrote that. He directed it. Jacques Grimault, I think, is based on his unpublished work. Was Revelations of the Pyramids. A lot of people have seen Revelations of the Pyramids. Great film.
Great film.
Done with Patrice Poyard, who's a friend of mine. We've talked a couple times on my channel, and he's done a follow-up to that called Builders of the Ancient Mysteries, and one of the things he touches on, along with like Antikythera mechanism and whatnot, are these caves in India that are carved out of like granite outcroppings. They're like carved straight into this granite rock. And he's done go ahead.
It's a precision room.
Yep, a number of them.
It's precision cut room that has like arched ceiling and perfectly flat walls, and they're huge. It's just it's amazing. They're polished. They look like the interiors of the Serapeum boxes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, insane precision. And he also had the ability, and this is where this is the thing I always yell and scream about, is he was able to scan them, like take in a $70,000 LiDAR scan, a proper LiDAR scanner, not me running around with an iPad, and scan these things. And the result of those scans was so profound that they're doing an entire film on these Barabar caves and what it means, because it's revealed a whole bunch of aspects of those things that just is mind-bending. So they're not, the walls aren't exactly straight either. They're both walls are sort of tilted in by something like a degree and a half. Like it's barely perceptible, but they're perfectly symmetrical. Like, and you've got the flatness that they've measured on those walls is down to like 1.5 microns of flatness. Like it's like the flattest thing that they've been able to measure. And then the geometry that's come out of these scans is incredibly impressive. And there's a whole number of these caves. Some of them are circular as well. There's rectangular rooms, there's circular rooms. Some of them look like a ship from Star Trek. Like it's just, and and they're incredibly polished, and it's just kind of a mind-bending effort of how they did them. And of course there's some crudely scratched writing in a couple of places on them that's been hammered into these perfect walls, and that's the orthodox explanation for them, right? That they were built by some king to a local cult or sect so that they could shelter from the rain. That's more or less the story. It's like from the monsoon, because it gets a little rainy in that area. So hey guys, we'll make you these nice caves. Chill.
Yeah, and it's a perfect example of like the exterior doesn't matter. The interior space is what matters, and it has to be incredibly precise. And so it's like, if form follows function, this is it falls right in the same mystery as the Serapeum boxes to me. Why did the interiors of these things need to be so precisely done? What type of what are you trying to contain? It has to have that.
Is it the nature of the tool or is it the purpose of the enclosure?
Yeah. So on the
Yeah.
one hand, you have a place where you can enter, and so maybe it has something to do with the human. Maybe it's just mind blowing to go in there. But the boxes in the Serapeum do not seem
Yeah,
to be
doors.
something that you're supposed to enter.
Yeah.
So that's kind
Yeah.
of like, and the cave that they're held in is definitely not precise. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I don't understand it. I come back to that whole like, well, there's a reason for the precision. It has to have been developed for some sort of function, whether it's a function related specifically to those caves or not. I don't know. It feels like it is to me. It's just so much effort to polish them and to get them that perfectly symmetrical. And there are multiple chambers. Like a lot of these rooms, they're not just the one room. There's like another room in them or something. There's gaps. So there's a whole bunch of them, and they're all slightly different. And actually, and here's another case of like tools down. One of them's not finished. Like there's one of them that has like it's unfinished, and it's as if the tools went down. And then you can see some effort where the later cultures have come and tried to do something to it, and it's just like they like chip the surface. And in like hammering away at something, and it's like, oh well, you've screwed the whole room. Like none of these other rooms have anything like that's like the most amazing thing about like the Serapeum boxes and these caves is like it's a single piece of stone, and when you're doing some reductive process, if you go too far anywhere, you are screwed. Like, and that just doesn't seem to happen. It's crazy.
I'll name another site that I would love to go to. It is in China, the Longyu Caves.
Oh yeah,
Longyu Grottos. Yeah.
Longyu Grottos. I'd love to see those.
Yeah, I'd love to get. Yeah, there's a lot of places in China I'd like to see as well. I agree. I've just been there too much. And
what's that quarry? To the
Yangshan
quarry.
Yangshan or Yangshin quarry.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would love to go there as well.
Yep, and they've got no end of pyramids dotted all over the place. They're hurriedly, the last 30 or 40 years been growing forests
trees
over.
on them. That's right. just plant trees on them, guys.
This didn't happen.
They won't be able to see them after a while.
If it wasn't Chinese culture, it doesn't exist. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of the CCP, and
right.
And I've been there probably 20 something times just with the IT career.
Okay.
Yeah. I got to travel a little bit, but there's I was just like, I'd go to a lot of other places before I go back to China.
All right.
Well, cool, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Ben.
And it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it has. Thanks for the invite.
Always looking forward to the next adventure.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yes, let's do it.
Are there...
Oh, I haven't looked.
Kyle's got to check to see if we got producers. Meanwhile, you guys can get a hold of us, Brothers of the Serpent, at gmail.com. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Ben?
It's UnchartedX.com or YouTube/C/UnchartedX. More or less everything there. I'm on social media as well. All the links are there.
All right. And support Ben and his work. You can do that probably through his website, right?
Yep.
You got links
/support.
There. Yep. And we have the Pyramid Scheme, so you can support us as well. Do that through Patreon or PayPal. Thank you guys so much. Thanks to all of the Discord people and all the Twitch people on stream.
Streaming live on Twitch.
Yeah.
I do that too.
We love all of you guys.
Indeed.
Always have.
Always will.
Indeed.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.
Get back to work.